is a promise. The sun will rise again, bringing fresh hopes and dreams with each new day that begins.
We knew my dad had been there for these reunions with his army buddies. I was 11 when we went to the first one in Hawaii. Bev was about 5, and we saw these people on the tarmac, and it was, I think, 2 in the morning, and we're wondering what all these people are standing there, and they were standing there for us. And I think that was one of the my first idea of what my dad meant to these people, for them to have come out like that. A lot of those people who were there at the airport, a lot of the people who would speak about my dad, he saved their life. And so that's why they've just treated him like royalty.
Feeling the beauty of life, feeling the beauty of life.
We had a reunion in Honolulu here, and during a banquet, another company guy made a smart remark saying, "Hey, Kashino, the snafu guy," he just said, "Oh, to heck with you, just brush it off your shoulder." But it hurt me. He was one of my men, huh?
When he heard that remark, he knew that Kash had gotten a raw deal, so he wanted to have that corrected.
He was really a tough soldier, mind as well as his physical strength,
Although he's big and looks tough, but he's the most gentle and caring person that I know. It's really, you look at him, you think, oh, he's a tough bully, but no way.
He said, "We never lost a battle, we never retreated, but we never left a wounded dead man behind."
When somebody gets any kind of wounded, he always come out and help. And I was just a brave soldier. A lot of people during the area barrage, the tree burst, they hide in a foxhole or something. But she'd always come up and help people. I admire him.
Well, actually, he should have been a lieutenant, but officers didn't like him. He didn't take much for order.
He's not a follower. He's a leader. And well, in Hawaii we call it popoli God. That means crazy God.
Kash was a gutsy person, and he was a happy-go-lucky, and he raised hell, I guess.
The only time we ever heard him talking was at the reunions, and the boys would be hanging around the bar to drink beer together, and that's when they would kind of relax and talk about remember this or remember that.
And my dad would be really drunk, and he and Fred Matsumura, they'd be, like kind of weaving down the hall and talking about, gee, those were the good old days in the stockades, and the word stockade.
I had to guard them a few times during the stockade.
The guys would bring beer in the stockade, and they would all come in the stockade and drink with us. We have about 10, 15 guys in the stockade drinking beer.
Brought him to see the movie, and then after the movie was over, then back into the stockade.
Okay.
Yeah.
They were just kind of reminiscing. Those were positive thoughts.
His friends would tell us about what a hero he was, how brave he was, how courageous he was.
He was wounded 6 times, and although some of them were slight wounds, but then yet you can tell how close he was to death,
Well, he wouldn't really tell me how bad he was injured, none of the time. But then when I'd get a letter on the Red Cross paper, Then I realized he was in the hospital.
We'd see his scars. He had a very bad one on his thigh. And, we grew up seeing that, but not really knowing the story behind it.
My youngest daughter knew I was in the war, but she didn't know which side was fought on, whether it was the Japanese Army or the American Army.
Yes, it was Pearl Harbor Day, and I was in 7th grade, and I was in Mrs. Fox's history class. And in our history book, there was very little written about it, but she did make verbal mention that it was Pearl Harbor Day. I don't think that there were any Japanese people in my class because it was very odd because everybody just turned around and looked at me. And I just felt so uncomfortable. And so I felt very uncomfortable. I mean, I didn't cry or anything, but I just felt very kind of alienated. So I went home and I said, geez, Dad, were you in the Japanese Army?
I think it's kind of our fault that we did not explain to them. So
he realized that, boy, I never made the connection with his medals and everything. And so
before he died, he spoke at our church, did many interviews on TV. He became sort of a spokesperson for it. And I think whereas up until those years, he didn't speak about it to us.
Kids get hurt a lot more, so I think in the textbooks, they should bring some of this stuff out about the 4 for a second, where the younger people realize that we were Americans.
The second generation, they were in a very anomalous situation because to their own hearts, they were Americans. They'd never been to Japan, most of them. They, were raised here. They had a lot of Caucasian friends.
I was born in Seattle, Washington, January 19, 1922. My mother was Hatsune Ota, and my father was Regimental Kashino. They came from Okayama. He was in the export-importing business. He was managing a company in Denver, Colorado called the S-Band Company, which supplied all the Japanese that worked in the railroad gangs in Montana and Wyoming, and he had more or less a store which supplied all the necessities that the Japanese wanted. 2 brothers and 1 sister were born in Denver, and then one sister was born in Japan, and the brother above me and myself were born in Seattle, Washington. Well, my father rented a house in an all-white neighborhood, and our family were about the only minorities going to this grammar school. My mother died in 1934, and my father died in 1935. Actually, my brothers and sisters raised me when I was a youngster. We went to a high school called Garfield High School, which was had quite a few Japanese and blacks assimilated with more Japanese at that time. I played sports at school, so I did not study that much. In fact, I remember a couple of my teachers telling me that if I took like French 2, they would flunk me, so you won't be able to play football, so you better quit at French 1. And the chemistry teacher told me the same thing, so I tried to take all the easy subjects I could. And when I went to apply for school in Chicago after the war was over, and I sent for my grades from high school, I was shocked. I didn't realize I was so brilliant. In 1938, we won the city championship football, in which I played quarterback. And the following year, my eyes went bad, so I played guard. I did get a respect because of the athletic ability and stuff, so I got along very well.
As a group, when you get groups of Niseis together, they were seen as, oh, it's still those folks. Individually, it's a Shiro, but as a group, it's, whoa, there's a whole bunch of those folks out there. when we went to war with Japan, then suddenly you look like the enemy kind of idea came up, and people started wearing badges, especially other Asians saying, I'm not a Jap.
I go out at nights wearing a China button, so I was never bothered. I guess most of the people were very conscientious. Japanese and American Japanese were very conscious, and they felt real bad about Pearl Harbor, so they obeyed the laws, which they had to.
That kind of sentiment never came up with the second-generation German or Italians. For them, second-generation German Italians, not only were they Americans, but they could become mayors of New York, or they could become generals of the army like Eisenhower.
Our West Coast became a potential combat zone. Living in that zone were more than 100,000 persons of Japanese ancestry, 2/3 of them American citizens, 1/3 aliens. We knew that some among them were potentially dangerous.
The day Pearl Harbor was attacked, I was working down at the Tremper Holly Farm. We were making holly wreaths for Christmas. And just got there that morning, and everything was so quiet. We had about half a dozen Japanese that were working there, and we noticed that 2 gentlemen were missing. And right away we figured, they were taken by the authorities.
Some of our neighbors got picked up. My uncle was one of them. He had a coffee farm, ran a small store to service the neighbors. And, we can't imagine how he can be considered a dangerous alien. We couldn't believe that these were upright citizens being picked up, for no reason at all, just being Japanese.
People were arrested and charged with espionage and sabotage, but not a single case of persons of Japanese ancestry. There must have been about, at least 50 cases of persons of German-sounding names. I've never looked into that, but there's nothing with respect to persons of Japanese ancestry who were thus placed in that kind of situation. That's why all the books that you read, they said there's no person has been ever convicted of it. People have been tried, but there's no evidence against them.
But no one knew what would happen among this concentrated population if Japanese forces should try to invade our shores. Military authorities therefore determined that all of them, citizens and aliens alike, would have to move.
Packing up, just what we could carry was very hard. We had to go in 2 taxi cabs because there was 7 of us. We had no friends that would offer to take us.
They put us on this bus and they took us to a fairground. I guess it was 10,000 people into an area where they had cows and horses and stuff, and they put partitions up, and I guess they didn't think we Japanese differentiated between women and men.
We lucked out. We were assigned to a barrack that they had just put up. They had put rows of barracks inside the racetrack. And so we felt fortunate. At least we weren't under the grandstand where the animal stalls were.
And that was quite an experience. First time we had to stuff the mattresses with straw, and then the toilets were open trench. So sometimes you could see somebody ahead of you, and not too much privacy.
It was real tough, especially in the Pialp, the assembly center. The food was terrible. Vienna sausage and stuff that most Japanese will never eat.
For a week straight, I remember. And one night, there was a big, people call it a riot, but it wasn't. It was because so many people had diarrhea, and they were running to the bathrooms. They had soldiers up there with machine guns pointed at us, and so they had the floodlights on and things, and so those who were running to the bathroom were the ones who were causing the commotion. But it was terrible to be accusing us of rioting when all it was a human needs. I was on the crew to take food to people who were sick, and Shiro had an ingrown toenail surgery at that time. It was in June, I believe. Then later on, when he was able to get around, he was on the grounds, and there was a dance that night. So he said, "Do you want to go dance with me?" Oh, a date with a football player. You know, that was what encouraged me. So I went with him. And his motive was to try to steer me over to this other guy who wanted to have a date with me, and I had refused him. So that was my first introduction to his, scheming. But I was just one of many girlfriends.
I graduated out of Fife on May 11, 1942. The thing about this is, on May 12th, I was behind barbed wire fence in Puyallup.
The next month, the principal or vice principal maybe came out to Puyallup Fairgrounds and awarded us our class of 42 certificates of diplomas.
And then they made this place in the desert near Twin Falls. It was called Minidoka, in which the Army put up some barracks, and it was just sagebrush and sand. It's hard to describe it, unless you actually went through it yourself. After the war was over, we had to guard some German prisoners. And I remember going on this guard tower in Italy and looking down on that compound, prisoner of war compound. And it reminded me of the camp. They had barbed wire fence completely around it with guard towers. And this was exactly what they had built for us in the deserts of Idaho. Did transform it into a fairly livable place to live. The school started, and they had a hospital, and we had a lot of nurses, and it made it enjoyable to having dances and create more activities for the people. We made a baseball field, and I really enjoyed sports very much.
He was good, but he told me not to watch him because he would swear and he probably played dirty, So he said, "Don't ever come and watch me." So I'd have to sneak behind people when I went to go watch the games.
During the fall time, the farmers needed help.
So they came to our camp in Idaho and asked us for the war relief to go out and help the farmers harvest their crops.
So we went on a bus and top sugar beets.
Even my wife, who was only 16, 17 at that time, they all went out. The old folks went out nearby.
I know my dad went out to a number of jobs. So once my friends and I said, "Oh, let's go," And boy, it was really hard work. None of us had ever done farm work before.
I went to work in a dairy farm in a place called Hamilton, Montana. That in January of '43, Roosevelt had stated that he was going to allow the Japanese America to form a separate, segregated unit. And we have to do something to prove our loyalty to America. So if this is what's going to take, I feel that I better go and
When I did find out and did the reading, I was probably my first year in college. I challenged my dad. In fact, I wrote a paper where I wrote a letter to my father, and it was the civil rights, there was the anti-war movements of the 60s, and I wrote to him in this essay, just kind of challenging why he would have done that when everybody was interned, my mom, her family, all of his family. Also, I guess, just going so compliantly into the camp. At the time, I was reading about the people who did stand up and protest and couldn't understand why more people hadn't done that.
The Japanese in America are finding Uncle Sam a loyal master despite the war. And here are American-born Japanese repaying that loyalty. Although their ancestors came from the land of the rising sun, these young Americans are volunteers in the U.S. Army, ready to fight and die defending America, the country of their birth.
A lot of people were saying, and I heard comments later on, that we all volunteer because we're all rah, rah, rah. But it was not that simple. A lot of us thought very deeply about volunteering because we thought of the future and that we had to do it.
My mother was very sad, but she knew, I guess, in her heart, with the war going on, that we would go.
Actually, it was quite an emotional time when we all volunteered from camp, because a lot of the parents had lost everything they owned when they were evacuated from the West Coast, and here their sons were going to volunteer to fight for the country when the parents had lost so much.
The government wanted more soldiers, and especially persons to help replace the people who were being killed and hurt in the famed 100th Battalion.
The 100th Battalion, United States Infantry, composed entirely of American citizens of Japanese descent, is honored for valorous combat service in Italy by General Mark Clark, commander of the Allied Fifth Army. For a brilliant fighting record from Salerno onward, the Japanese Americans are cited as a unit and receive citation streamers to be permanently attached to their battle colors. In one combat action after another, these stalwart American fighting men have brought honor to themselves and to a nation which is proud to call them citizens.
Well, when the volunteers didn't suffice to fill the need for replacements, then a draft was issued. This created another issue in which people were being drafted out of prison camps.
When they come to pick me up to go for physical, I didn't go that day. So the next day, the marshal picked me up. U.S. Marshal took me to the Turnfall jail, and then a couple of days later they took us to Boise County Jail. There was two of us, Toshuno and I. We stayed there for about a couple of months, and they offered to let us out of jail if we volunteered. So I volunteered after 2 months, but the jail wasn't bad, you know.
Hundreds did submit to the draft, went on and served in the 442nd 100th Battalion. And in fact, the famous honor roll in Minidoka, right as you go through the gate of the camp that's near Twin Falls in Idaho, lists all the people who had served valiantly from Minidoka. But there were other people who said, no, this is wrong. Why am I being drafted out of this kind of place? And they were called resistors. And for decades, people who had resisted the draft and refused to be so drafted were found guilty and put into federal prison.
The men in Hawaii respected those men who did not volunteer. I noticed that most of the opposition comes from mainland people because they came from the same camps. But for us, we felt that these are men who were demonstrating courage of a different sort. We were happy that there were those among us with the gumption to challenge the order of the land. That took a lot of guts.
I volunteered in March of 1943, but I had a little problem.
They told him to work on a Sunday, and he said, no, that's my day off.
I had this warehouse gang which did all the heavy work, and they were all ex-athletes. So it was a Sunday when the foreman got a hold of me and says, Cash, we got to load the meat. Here we were kind of dressed up on Sunday, so I said, Hank, we're all dressed up. And he said, so we went down there, and I got the crew rounded up, picked them up, and went down to the railroad tracks to unload the meat. Now it was, you know how meat is just slimy, and so we tried not to get our clothes dirty, and this Holly director got pretty close, so he got a little bit of meat on him, I guess, and so he got mad at me, and so the next day, this was on Sunday, and Monday, this Japanese foreman says I was fired, and my crew was fired, so I turned fine for $12 a month. What's a big deal, you know? So this warehouse has supplied all 10,000 people, so it was quite a big compound. I had about 12 guys in my crew, and they said, hey, that's lousy. We work on Sunday and no overtime, and they fire us? Let's strike.
And I started the first strike in Minidoka.
So this lasted about 3 hours, I guess, and they were telling me, hey, Cash, you're starving the people in camp. I says, fine, you fired me, hire me back, we'll go back to work. So anyway, to make a long story short, they hired me back. And I guess this director kind of had it against me, and so they said it made it hard for me to volunteer for some reason. So finally, I volunteered in March, and it wasn't September until I got my orders to go. I was assigned to I Company on the 3rd Battalion of the 442nd.
And he joined us after our basic training, I guess.
The major part of the men were from Hawaii.
Somehow, he assimilated with us very quickly, not like the other mainland boys.
For some reason, mainlanders, we call them kotonks, and Hawaii men just could not get together. Well, the mainlanders were fair of complexion, they spoke good English. The fights were so terrible that the senior officers of the regiment seriously considered disbanding the 442nd. They tried everything. Social hours, discussion groups. Can you imagine discussion groups with us? And one day, all the companies received invitations from 2 places, Lower Arkansas, Jerome, Arkansas. We had no idea where Jerome and Lower were. Then we all had our guitars and ukuleles, and we were singing all the way down to Arkansas until our convoy went to Lowell. There were men and women who looked like us. Then it dawned on me that this was the American concentration camp. Well, we tried our best to show appreciation and enjoy ourselves, but how can you? On the way back, there was no singing in my truck, just quiet. And I can imagine every one of us was thinking to himself, would I have volunteered if I were in that camp? And you know, to this day, to be honest, I don't know. I might very well have said, nuts to you. When we got back to Shelby, the regiment was full. No more fights. All brotherhood. And that's the way it was.
I think this probably created a bond between us that has lasted for over 50 years. I remember the 2nd and 3rd Battalion were attacked. This is our first drive. And as we moved up to this town, the church bell rang and all that, so we moved through the town, and all of a sudden the machine gun started firing at us from the hills above. And this is the first time that we seen any combat. I was in the hospital when this officer from 442nd said, "Hey, the Alpha's moving to France, and we can join them later." I said, "Hell no, I better go, because we would probably end up with some other outfit, and I didn't want to leave the 442nd, so I got my clothes and took off and went back to join the outfit, and we landed in southern France. Then we moved up to your areas. And then we just started to get cleaned up and stuff when we had orders to move up to save the lost battalion.
American troops of Japanese descent, men who have distinguished themselves repeatedly in the European War, move out to rescue the battalion. In heavy fighting, they advance to cut an escape route through the Nazi line. German prisoners are taken as the breakthrough is made, and men of the lost battalion come back.
There's a costly battle, everybody knows that, but at least we made a name for ourselves, and it went down as one of the 10 great battles of the United States Army. This is the history there.
He was assigned as a ration detail man from I Company. He went to the commander and said, the Germans have this place zeroed in already. Battalion commander says, "Oh, you go get the ration when the truck comes."
I knew this enemy was in that position in the hills. It's quiet as a pin. Here the Jeep comes up with the supplies. The Germans hear it. The Germans know exactly the roads that they have to take because they've left that area.
They'll know something is happening. They're going to start throwing. The colonel said, "Go."
It was around 4 p.m., I suppose, when someone came around asking for volunteers to make up a 12-man ration detail. And I remember distinctly saying that I need one more man. And I said, all right, I will volunteer and be the last guy. When 8 p.m. came, all the volunteers lined up and the staff sergeant led the way. Later on, I will realize that his name was Shiro Kashino. And I knew the person in front of me, the 11th man, he was Norman Kimura. And about 200 yards away from the front lines, all of a sudden,
and lo and behold,
the whole ration detail was engulfed in artillery barrage. The next day, that's when a fellow Japanese-American soldier who was wounded came to my bedside and told me for the first time that of the 12-man ration detail, 4 of you had survived and 8 had died. And I wondered, who were the 2 others? Norman Kimura and I in this hospital, but where are the rest of the 2 of them?
He never sat down and told me the whole story, but little bits and pieces. Shiro carried one of them. He said he carried him on his shoulder all the way because it was apparent that he's going to lose his leg. He looked for the officer.
He told the colonel, I would rather have starved than get killed like this. Then that didn't do too well with the colonel.
He came over and asked me, hey, something in the back, can you take a look? And there was a shrapnel hole right in his back. I said, hey, you better get the medic, you're wounded.
It was not that bad, so they fixed me up, and so I came back to the front line again, and I remember Smitty Koga drove the Jeep back, and I was on next to him, and as we moved up with the supplies, because that's how I could get back to the front line again, the Jeep people and all the fellows who would help with the cook dove into the Jeep, and I was sitting in the Jeep, and I was laughing at it. What are they just hiding for, you know? And then I got one right in my leg, and then knocked me on my butt, you know. And anyway, they sent me back, and I finally ended up all the way back to England that winter.
I asked our surviving guys in our company what happened to him, and they told me that Kash won't come back. He said they'll cut his leg off, he'll get this $1 million wound and go home. Well, 5-6 months later, when we went down to southern France, Kash shows up. He came over and says, what are you guys doing tonight? And I said, well, probably play cards. And he got mad at us and he said, you know, you might be dead tomorrow. Which meant that you better have your fun today. But they went downtown that night and got into the trouble.
My platoon members went to a bar dance hall in a small place, small village in the southern France. And one of our guys got into a hassle with an MP officer.
Shiro and about 7 or 8 of us were at a long table having a drink there. And then I saw a bunch of MPs coming in, going towards the bar. So I went up to the bar and I talked to the MP. He was a sergeant also. I told him, what's the problem? Oh, you having any problem here? He said, no. Is this one of your men? I told him, yes, he's one of my men. So he says, take care of him, because he was pretty drunk. I told him, okay. And then they started to walk off. So I went back to where the bunch of us were sitting down. And I heard footsteps running. So I turned around and looked. When I saw this guy, his name is Matsuda, punched somebody. I didn't know who he punched.
And the next thing you knew, our men had dumped the MPs. And it happened to be that one was an officer.
Kashino and Fred Matsumuro and Bini Hayashi went in to separate one of our guys with the officer.
The lieutenant was on MP duty that night, and he was with the Puerto Rican National Guard in that particular area.
And before he left, he told us that maybe we should go home.
And we all took off and went back to our areas and went to sleep. The next morning, the lieutenant colonel with the major and the provost marshal and a whole slew of MPs came down and picked us all up.
Others were released, but Kashino, Fred Matsumura, Bini, and the guy who caused the ruckus. Yeah?
The chaplain came down and asked him to admit that he was the one, but he wouldn't do it.
Why don't you own up and tell what happened so that the other guys can go free? But this fourth guy won't say. He won't take the blame.
Yeah, I guess he was reluctant to do anything. It was a bad incident for him. Some people, blamed him, and I keep thinking that he was at the bar relaxing, feeling no pain. I don't think he himself remembers completely what happened.
Somehow that vengeance was in the colonel. Chaplain Yamada came to see me. He said, you know what? The colonel said he's going to make an example of these guys.
It was kind of a joke. We had our own putt, and we stayed in the compound behind the regimental, and we did our time there.
And he wrote to me about a week later saying, well, I got into some trouble, and I may not continue to be a sergeant, just casual like that.
Then I heard that the outfit was moving back to Italy again, so I thought, oh God, I guess I'm going to miss the next battle. But right before they shipped out, Purcell gave me a release, and I was sent back to the outfit.
They took him out of the stockade and tell him to go fight. Can you imagine? Yeah.
I guess we had no choice. They tell us we're going, you're going to join your platoon, and we're going to move out.
But they needed the leadership because by then there was so many replacements.
We left the 5th Army in about the same place 5 or 6 months before, and we went to France to fight. They called us back to break the Gothic line, which the Allied force could not break 5 or 6 months.
The Gothic line was more like a solid wall, over 3,000 feet high. It was impossible for anybody to walk from the bottom to the top without being observed, because the Germans had every inch of it covered.
We climbed that hill for all night.
Just grab each guy's shirt tail and keep going. We couldn't see nothing.
Luckily, we made it up to the top without having to fire a shot.
Now, we could have been slaughtered. If the Germans had known that we were climbing up this Italian trail behind them, and they could have thrown a barrage on us, hey, you'd have found 5,000 dead Buddhists down the bottom of the hill.
We punched through that line and then kept going all the way through.
We liberated the town of Massa, and then the next day we liberated the town of Carrara.
There was a hill that the Germans were using for observation posts.
It wasn't just an outpost, it was a whole, I don't know whether it was a battalion or what it was, but anyway, we really got hurt up there.
We stayed up all night long. We had our wounded, there had to be one soldier wounded on the forward slope of the hill. And so I had gone down and I put him in kind of indentation in the hill there, so that where the machine gun would not hit him. And I told him that I'd come back and pick him up. I hated to leave him there because I knew darn well I'd kind of a tourniquet around his leg. And so I went back and got some fellows from the heavy weapons.
Me and my sergeant Yamaguchi and Matsushita went with Kash, and then Kashino. He went after that machine gun nest on broad daylight.
He was on top with his Tommy gun firing away, and here was these bullets coming at him, and not a one hit him.
And then he came back with his jacket ripped, but never hit his body.
They gave me a Silver Star attack when I led the attack.
But he should have got a lot more than that. He deserved a lot more than that.
He's the bravest soldier I ever saw in the 442nd.
It was a little almost embarrassing because he talked so much about my dad in his oral history, and Barney felt that it was my dad who saved his life and told various stories. Kash is the one that should have gotten the Medal of Honor, not me, so anyway.
In the back of my mind, I saw Colonel Purcell up there on the line with Kash, and I couldn't figure out what he was doing. I tried to get close enough to listen to what they were talking about, but then a shell came over.
The artillery shell hit the corner of the building, and the piece of cement block hit me in the head and shrapnel the shoulder and stuff.
Luckily, it was a dud. Otherwise, all three of us would have been gone.
Then I went back to the aid station. They said one of my best buddies, who I told him to take over the platoon, was missing in action.
So Kash took off right away. You know, he said, Fred, I'm going back to the line.
Kash wanted to go retrieve him, but our lieutenant thought better to wait a while, you know.
That was the one big argument between Kash and Lieutenant Kubota, because Kash couldn't figure out why, when Beanie got hit, that Lieutenant Kubota didn't try to drag him back or something.
But then there's another part of the story too. Kubota is in charge of the platoon.
During training, we were told in an open, don't go to a person who is wounded or killed, whatever. So, of course, I was afraid too, that if I should go over here to him, I would get hit also. And I called the medics and told them I had a map. I told them that this is just about the place where Beanie fell.
And they found him, but he was dead. So, you know,
Kash I think kind of blamed himself for that. He said, that would have been my bullet. He probably would have been the one to go up on that patrol with Lieutenant Kubota. And when he went back with him, Beanie went up.
He took my place in that, you see.
After the war kind of ended, we were guarding prisoners.
thousands of Germans gave up to us in northern Italy. The high-ranking officer would not surrender to our officers because they were not equivalent ranks. So I remember they had to get a higher officer up there to accept the surrender of the German soldier. But people died right up to the very end. So if the war had ended just a few days early, they still would have been alive. When the war was over, they court-martialed me.
We always thought that if he went back into action, they would drop all charges against him, but they didn't.
I thought the case was over, that we were free. I think there were about 4 officers sitting on the desk there, and we were brought in front of them, and we were found guilty.
Received a 6-month sentence and a 6-month without pay.
Stripped of our stripes, reduced to the rank of private.
They gave me time for the time that I was in the stockade in France, and they also gave me time, they were nice, the time I was in combat.
We were busted and sent back to our company.
I guess they thought I was giving everybody a bad time, so they sent me to Switzerland for the first Allied troops into Switzerland. So I came back and they said, hey, you better go on another pass, telling me Florence.
War was over, so they sent them on R&R every chance they could.
Finally got my papers rounded up, so they sent me home. So I guess they wanted to get rid of me.
Returning from 3 years of war service in Italy and France, the 442nd Combat Team receives a rousing welcome at New York. The veteran unit is made up of Japanese Americans, many from Hawaii. Regimental colors are brought forward to receive the Presidential Unit Citation.
You fought not only the enemy, but you fought prejudice, and you've won. Keep up that fight, and we'll continue to win.
For a president who came after Roosevelt, who signed the order to put them into camp, indicates, at least at the presidential level, that there was a mind shift. To me, the Japanese American story is not one in which I want us to castigate America. No, America is a great country. We are the only country that can make a mistake and then say, I apologize. So what we have to do is to make sure that that kind of apology does not have to happen again. That to me is the legacy that Japanese Americans should push for, and to push for all other groups that are facing similar situations.
My girlfriend was in Chicago, so I got discharged at Fort Sheridan in Chicago.
Right after we got married in 1945, December, we started getting cards from the officer that he had cussed out. Christmas card, New Year's card, Valentine's card, and St. Patrick's card. He questioned, why in the heck is he sending me these cards? And each time he got one, he just threw it in the garbage can. And now we wish that we had saved them, But so going forward to 1976, this officer came to the reunion, and one of his purposes was to try to meet Shiro and see if they could patch things up, I think. He extended his hand, and Shiro was gentlemanly enough to shake his hand. And then he turned to me and said, Are you his wife? I said, yes. And he says, how could you stand being married to a guy like him? And I don't know whether he was stated in jest, but it made me very angry. So I said, he's a perfect gentleman and he's a wonderful husband. And I just kind of turned on my heels and walked out. So Shiro followed me, and so that was the end of that meeting. But I think he was trying to make amends, how many years later. We stayed in Chicago for 1 year while he went to Chicago Technical School. And he went for air conditioning and refrigeration. And he couldn't find a job because the unions wouldn't hire them. And so he said, I'm going to go back to Seattle. Plus, he was very homesick for Seattle, wanted to come home. He tried to get into the union here, but it was the same story. They don't hire Japanese. So he used to work for Tashiro Hardware pre-war, so he went to see the Tashiros, and they said, anytime you want to come back, we'll give you a job.
He had a lot of friends, lots of friends. They go there and buy their fishing tackles. Then later on, he went on selling Ford. I guess he did all right because he had a lot of friends.
The car dealership went out of business. He decided he's going to look for another job in another area. He realized that he didn't have any talents except his mouth. So Bill Pierre in Lake City came after him and said, come on, we got a job for you. Eventually he became one of the managers of the dealership. In fact, when he died, the boss's wife asked me if they could have one of his pictures that I had up. They started, I think, March of 46, and we arrived back in Seattle in January of 47, and right away they made him commander. So he was a second commander. He went to the leaders of the Japanese community, and he went to one of their meetings, and he said that, here all the veterans are coming back, and you should do something to honor them. So then they hatched the idea to put up a memorial, and they got the space in Lakeview. In those days, we didn't have any money, but they raised $10,000, and at that time it was big money, So we built that nice monument for $10,000. There was meaning to it. It was from Carrara or somewhere in Italy.
during a banquet, another company guy made a smart remark saying, "Hey, Kashino, the snafu guy."
We had a joint banquet or something, and somebody was raising Cash down. So that's when Kubota, I think, took up the issue.
And he said, "Listen, you guys, I'm going to ask for your records to be reviewed because we want to get rid of that court-martial."
I said, "Oh, forget it. I'm not interested."
And Shiro said the same thing.
I guess he was reluctant, let dead things lie, don't make any more waves.
I told him that, I really think that you should do that because you keep joking about how when I die, they're going to put Private Shiro Kashino because they put down the rank that you were discharged at. And for the sake of the girls, they would like to see that you get your rank back.
Then Cash said, "Okay, I'll do it then."
I wrote to Danny Noe and Spock Matsunaga at the time.
Both of them were senators at that time, and asked them to try to get his records and start the ball rolling.
They did, but they got letters saying that no records are found.
His records were burned in the 1973 fire at St. Louis, where they had the archives.
The answer was that we couldn't do anything.
10 years later, Patsy Mink, who was with the House of Representatives, she wrote us a letter saying that the Army did find partial records.
And part of it was actually burned.
Some of them they couldn't copy at all. But within that group of pages was a copy of the order charging him for court-martial.
In Shiro's case, the main one was that he was drunk and disrespectful.
They had a jury of some officers.
There was nobody representing us, and we're not allowed to talk to those poor judges or whatever they were.
They had the names of those who were present, so it showed at the bottom who received copies of the particular order. And he had never received a copy of it, and it said in the court reporter's notes that he had pleaded guilty.
He never did plead guilty, and I tried to locate the persons that was involved in the court-martial. Sadaichi, Kash, Fred Matsumura, can't recall any officer's name. And the only name that's on the court-martial thing is Kobayashi. It took me a couple of months to locate him as the officer. It's just a formality that he signs off on that, but he doesn't remember the case at all.
He was not in good health at all, and he was, died soon after.
So we had to rely on Matsuda, and he testified that he was the one that's the fracas started about. With Matsuda's affidavit, the thing went through, and they gave Shiro back his sergeant stripes.
And allowed him to get his pay that he didn't get. It was kind of a relief for me because I didn't know whether he was really guilty or not, and he just dismissed it as, just a fight. Then they tried to find the officer who was supposedly hit.
Lieutenant Suro didn't want to press charges. We felt that we have good evidence on that.
So to find him was a problem.
That was kind of like a needle in a haystack.
And they just happened to have a bankers conference at Waikiki. Clarence Talbot was the first sergeant for I Company. He also was the director of the bank association in Hawaii. And a banker from Puerto Rico was sitting next to Clarence.
So in conversation, he says, we're trying to find out this officer who was involved in a barroom brawl in southern France, and his name is George Suro.
The banker surprised him by saying, "Hey, that's my friend."
And he verified the fact that he had told Chaplain Yamada that he didn't want to press charges. So he said that he was very surprised that there was the court-martial had been effected.
I think it was June 9 or 11, we got the affidavit here. About 2 weeks before then, Shiro went to the hospital. We didn't know about that.
Well, as we realized that he may not make it, told him that we would see it to the end. Hopefully it would be successful or not,
When I called Louise that we got the affidavit, that day she said Kash just passed away. Yeah.
Actually, they had told him that his court-martial would be reversed, but they couldn't take it off the records.
It's like it's past the period for appeal. They also said that as far as the court-martial, only the Judge Advocate General can dismiss the charges.
We kind of talked back and forth, what should we do, and Bill Thompson said, well, I think that it would, maybe we could just kind of appeal to them to please reconsider their decision. If his application can be reconsidered and the stigma of a court-martial of dubious circumstances erased, we will all be grateful knowing that justice has been served and my husband vindicated. If the application is once again denied, my only consolation would be the fact that he died not knowing that he had lost his last battle. And in December, I received a letter from General Walter Huffman clearing Shiro's court-martial record. It came as quite a surprise and was very emotional for me.
The general mentioned that Kash was an American hero, and that's the way he should be remembered.
I thought, yeah, Dad would have liked that, because he did feel he was an American first.
The sad part is that Kashino's release came after he passed away.
It was unfortunate that he was the way he was. I mean, it didn't, okay, he was court-martial, but he shrugged it off. Always looked forward. He never looked back. He was, here today, gone tomorrow kind of guy. He always told me, I'm lucky I came home alive. Look at all my friends who were killed.
We couldn't locate Fred's record. His one probably went up in flames. But since he testified for Shiro, there's no doubt his case is tied in with Kash. So when we appealed Fred's case, all we had to do was use what we had for Kash. After Fred and Kash were cleared, we thought we'd try to help James Matsuda, but he had passed away, so that matter is over.